This is historic Oxford, famous for its dreaming spires and sometimes brilliant, sometimes batty academics. But Oxford is also a great example of how a typical British city has grown. Professor Ian Bentley, an expert in urban design, is going to show me how the story of this university town is written into the landscape below us.
Here you can see the centre, the sort of university core. Can you see, just going under our wing, is the classic view of the quadrangles of the university here.
But Oxford isn't just defined by its colleges, also by water. Because like much of lowland Britain, Oxford's a really wet place. The Saxon settlement was built between two rivers, the Thames and the Cherwell, hence its name, the ford for oxen, or cow splash you might call it. Water meadows and floodplains still play a key role in the way Oxford looks today. The city has to fit buildings around the water in areas that won't get flooded. Luckily, there are these spits of firm gravel land that fan out from the city's centre. This has caused Oxford to expand in a rather curious way. It's not a circular blob like lots of other cities, sort of star-shaped. One of the first areas to be developed was the top of the star, going northwards. In the mid-19th century, Oxford's wealthy businessmen and college dons used this land to build some of the city's poshest houses.
You can see that the houses are quite sort of large and detached, and the gardens are very large. They're in a way an attempt really almost to build a forest that you put villas in. It's interesting, when you see it from the ground, strangely you see far more of the green than when you look down on it. I thought it would be the other way round.
Right. We've got posh academic Oxford on its spit of gravel.
That's right.
And then we've got the second Oxford to the east.
We have, yeah.
And then there's this huge sprawl here.
Yes, and that's primarily driven by car manufacturing.
By the early 20th century, Oxford was no longer simply a city of dons and colleges. Typically for Britain, industry was beginning to dominate. The mighty Morris Motor Company opened its first factory in Cowley, countryside to the southeast. The much-loved Mini was built here, and it still is, even if the company is now German-owned.
Well, you can see the car works behind us if you had a double-jointed neck.
All right. So now coming in on the east of the city.
Yeah. And of course the ever-expanding car works needed an ever-expanding workforce, and they got accommodated in housing that spread between the existing city and the car works in the 20s and 30s.
But once the industrial Oxford starts to take off, it expands to the east.
Yes, that's right.
Why is that?
Well, partly because that's where there was land available reasonably near the city centre, but the reason why that land hadn't been taken up beforehand was down to the climate, I think, that the effluent of the city, coal fires, smoke and sort of mess, that was carried to the east by the wind, and so ideally nobody wanted to live there, so the people that ended up living there were the people obviously with the less purchasing power, basically.
And that's what, I mean, away from Oxford, again and again you find the industrial parts of cities located on the east.
You do.
Because of the wind.
Yes, as in London, the west end's the posh bit, the east end's the rough bit. Yeah.
After Cowley, the suburbs continued to grow and grow. Private semi-detached houses popped up like neatly planted carrots. And the city council responded with their own form of social engineering. Vast symmetrical housing estates dreamt up by great committees of town planners.
Later on, when you start to get council housing, at the same time you've got lots of private spec building.
Yeah.
Can again you tell, looking from the air, the difference between them?
Yes, you can. You can tell at least the best of the council housing because somebody designed it as an overall layout, and you find that there are squares and crescents and things like that in it, and far more use of terraced houses because they were trying to express a sense of community in it, whereas the private sector is built in semi-detached houses, which is trying to express the sort of individual ownership.
So you can actually almost see sort of socialism
Yes,
and individualism
you can.
laid out below
you. Can. Yes,
Yeah.
you can. Very clearly, yeah.
And the green belt is very, very obvious, isn't it? It suddenly starts and then that's
it is. Very obvious.
Which is, I guess, the case for green belt, that it's clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly when it's sort of reinforced by the ring road. I think that, you know, put the two together and they do say this far and no further, don't they?
It's the sort of new version of the city ramparts, I
Sort
suppose.
of, yeah, kind of rampart in the mind, sort of, yeah.
Green belts were part of Britain's great change in political clothing.